It's a single universe. It's integral with itself throughout this vast extent in space and a sequence of transformations in time, so that the universe is coherent. And that's why we have to think universe, we have to think community. And nothing has meaning except in that context. Humans try to make the universe human referent rather than making the human universe referent.
The image of a universe that explodes into existence all in one go in this gigantic Big Bang, the sort of hot primeval origin and the unfolding of the universe into the form that we see today, this sort of sequential unwinding of things, I think does fit in so much with, particularly in our Western culture, with our inheritance of Genesis and the notion of creation and the different stages of the creative process.
In the beginning was the flame. Everything that would ever exist came to birth from the flame. There was nothing outside the flame, and nothing that was not flame. From the flame unfurled all space and time. If the unfurling had been faster, nothing could have formed in the foam of space-time. If it had been slower, the foam would have collapsed back into the vacuum. Storms of particles sparkled in and out of existence. The fire began to cool, and as it cooled, there was a hardening, the beginnings of structure. From the one force that drove the unfurling, split the four forces of nature. The architecture of space-time was now fixed. The nuclear structure of the universe was now determined. The interactions of all future particles were held within fixed limits. The storm of particles ceased. There was a great death. From this death, there came new particles that lasted and made bonds, linking together in patterns that would endure. For the first time, there was stability. For 1 million years, the universe cooled and grew. Out of the embers of the fireball, atoms formed of hydrogen and helium. From the hydrogen and helium, clouds constellated into galaxies. In the hot center of the galaxies, the first stars were born, luminous with heat. In the center of the stars, new elements were forged, carbon, oxygen, and iron. The stars burnt and died, and new stars came. Some stars exploded. They poured out their creations to enrich the flowing gases of space. In the dust of the violent death of stars were scattered the seeds of life.
What are the implications of learning that we live in this universe that began as a Big Bang? One of the things is that we see that everything around us actually has come out of that event. It's one single energy event. The universe is a single energy event. So that we find ourselves surrounded by rocks. Well, the rocks themselves had their origin in that fiery moment, and the oceans, the air, all of this comes out of that. In fact, the energy with which I can speak or we can move, all of this actually is the same energy, precisely the same energy of that initial event. We ride on the energy from the birth of the universe.
The Big Bang universe is an evolving web of space-time, which has produced everything from particles to people.
A lot of my time has been spent reflecting on galaxies and stars, and I've noticed that over the years, my own relationship with the stars has actually changed in this sense that we now know that the elements of our body were actually fashioned in the stars. Now, this is a fact that once I learned that, I was changed forever. I don't think it's possible to really know that we came out of the stars and remain in the same relationship. So now when I look at the night sky and marvel of the stars, I'm reflecting on my ancestry.
The universe ultimately is a communion of subjects not a collection of objects. No matter how much relationship exists between objects, if it is not a communion of subjects, then it escapes the real world. And that's why the universe as adventure, the universe as spontaneity is so important, and everything has an interior voice. It expresses itself. An atom says, I'm an atom. It does this through all its manifestations, and these manifestations are measured by the scientists, but the voice itself, scientists tend not to hear.
Before we had the idea that the human was somehow separate from the universe, and in fact the scientist would view his or her work as an observing of the universe from afar. And so the idea would be to capture the laws of the universe, the facts of the universe that's out there. And so always we regarded ourselves as separate from that. And this was actually part of the scientific canon, that the experiences of the human were of a lower order of reality compared to the position of particles. Now, we can't hold that dualism anymore. Not only is mass a form of energy, it's also the case that the human and life itself is a primary revelation of the nature of the universe. From the very beginning, in a sense, the universe was poised to bring forth life, so that our existence here can't be seen as something that's alien. And furthermore, our own deep experiences, the realm of the psyche, the soul, the feelings of the human, this too is as much a part of the universe as the stars are, or as the gravitational interaction. It is a primary illustration of the underlying order of the universe.
Brian Swimme believes that the new scientific cosmology can provide a universal creation story for the first time in human history. He wants to pass it on, especially to the young.
Oh, I mean catching, don't
Get the glove on the ground, right? Hey, there's 2 outs, you're on third base with the ball hit. What do you do?
Run!
As fast as you can, right? There's an awakening in a young person around adolescence where they now know what it's like to be related in the family, and they know they're a small group, but suddenly they want to be related to the universe. And so I take the role of mentorship seriously, trying to introduce young people to some of the larger issues. The way in which in our culture that young people get together is around athletics. So I find myself coaching baseball. When I look at these youngsters, I always think each one, in a certain sense, has the whole dimension of the earth wrapped into his destiny. I think of my time with young people as something like what the elders in the past would do.
What's most important is for the child to realize that this is the answer to the question of who am I? Because this is the story of the child as well as the story of the universe. So to tell the child his own story, the child needs to understand that the child is the consequence of a vast program, and that it took this wonderful program of this sequence of transformations in order for a world to be created, that the child can come into existence, and that the child, this is the larger self of the child. The child has its particular individual mode of being. It also has its universe mode of being. And when these two things come together, then life is fulfilled. I would have in mind the deep mystery of the universe that's revealed in every particle of the universe, but is not confined to it. In other words, it's the deep mystery of the dawn and the sunset, the deep mystery of the stars at night, the mystery in the song of the birds, or in the waves of the sea, or the building of the seacoast. All these things carry the deep mystery of the universe, and that is why this resonance in the human mind and imagination is so powerful. We can describe what happens, but to experience this, say, in terms of the great adventure of the universe. And that is something that it takes something beyond measurement. For instance, a person has to consider something like music. If you reduce a symphony to the notes and say there's so many vibrations to this note and that note and so forth, you've lost the music of the thing, you lost the reality of the thing. So you will lose the reality of the universe if you merely describe in quantitative terms the particles that the universe is composed of. Well, to my view, the whole thing is celebration. The universe is a celebratory event, particularly the earth. What do the flowers do? What do the birds do? The birds sing, they celebrate, the flowers bloom, and the trees grow in their majesty, and the waves, so forth.
What about the awe you felt when your child was born? Or when you first made love? Or with the starry night? What about the awe that the astronauts have experienced on the moon? You know, they all came back mystics. This is why most of them went crazy, and the others ran for political office, which is something analogous. The souls changed up there. You see, the opposite of awe is taking for granted. And our civilization has been taking for granted for a long time. That's one reason we're bored and we're violent. And we don't have the reverence and therefore the sense of the sacred toward the soil and the waters and the air.
Ideas like reverence for the air and celebration of plants have a contemporary ring to them. But they fit so badly with the scientific view of nature because of a long process of separation.
For me, a key moment in the history of reductionism was the year 1600, the opening of the 17th century, when the church burned Giordano Bruno at the stake. Giordano Bruno was a theologian and a scientist, and he was trying to understand the new cosmology of that time in light of our spiritual history. When he was burned at the stake, I think it kind of freaked scientists out because they had already observed the violent 16th century when Christians had burned each other all over Europe. And in a sense, I think they formed a truce with religion, realizing these believers can be kind of violent people. They said, you people take the soul, and we'll take the universe and the body. And so science went its way and found the basic power of the universe in this century with the split of the atom. But the result was that science went its way without a conscience, without a sense of justice that you get from religious tradition. And so in this century, science has sold its soul to the military, to petrochemical corporations, etc., etc. Meanwhile, the church, having surrendered the universe, introverted the soul, made it more and more puny and more introspective. So the soul became something smaller and smaller, cut off from the universe. And so religion in great part has trivialized its basic stories, its message, even its sense of sin has been trivialized. We don't hear about ecocide and biocide and geocide as the real sins of our time.
We have in our tradition a baptismal ceremony where we introduce the infant to the divine order and to a human religious community. We don't introduce the child to the natural world. Now, with the Omaha Indians, the infant is born, he is presented to the sun, moon, stars, all ye that move in the heavens, and says, a new life is come into your midst. Consent ye, we implore, make its path smooth, that it may pass beyond the first hill. Then the atmospheric powers, and then to the trees, and to all these wondrous animals, even to the insects. A new life has come into your midst. Now, we're lacking that. That bonds the child to the whole planetary system, to the whole universe system. We don't have that.
If you look at native peoples' cultures, it is a basic form of education of passing the story on to the young. And I think we need a massive emptying, what the mystics would call letting go, an emptying process in our educational systems. We need to celebrate the right hemisphere of the brain again. There's a brain researcher at Stanford who has recently told me after 21 years of being locked up in a laboratory studying the right hemisphere of the brain, he has found that it's all about awe. And I say, are we training people for awe in our educational systems, in our media, in our churches? Absolutely not. This is why there's so much interest in titillating news so often in journalism. Now, how do you train people for awe? I think the single most important thing we could do for our species is to renew ritual. When I talk about ritual, ritual is something we do in our homes, with our families, in our neighborhoods. It's not just something you do in a big building called church. In fact, frankly, that may be the last place it's happening these days. Rituals are the way we celebrate with our bodies, with a breath going, and therefore a prayer. We celebrate our being here in the universe. And just listening to our hearts, feeling the passion we have, the grief we're feeling over the struggle of the earth today and the despair of the young, and the awe and the wonder. That goes together, the grief and the awe. All of it is heart work. And all of that is the work of the mystic. And today, we're all called to be mystics. The book of Job is one of the great books of the wisdom literature of the Bible. But I compare Job to a first world person because he was humming along real good with a good income, healthy flock, good reputation in the community. All his kids were going to college, apparently. And then it all caved in on him. And he took his problem to God and asked, what's going on? And God's answer was, where were you, Job, when I laid the foundations of the earth? Did you give the horse its might? Do you know how the mountain goats give forth their young? God's answer was cosmology, that Job had to put his woes in the context of all of creation. We're not the only species. We're not the only thing going on in the universe. And when Job realized that, he said, I put my hand on my mouth. He shut up. He learned to listen, and that is part of the experience of awe. When you experience awe, you experience silence at a deep level, and you learn to listen again. That is what is happening and needs to happen even more deeply in the so-called first world today. We need to listen more to the wonder and the woes of our species and of creation itself. And in that process, like Job, we'll be healed and liberated. And so cosmology is a source of liberation today. And as it was for Job